worked my shift that day, and I was just milling around the pool because I had nothing to do in between my shifts. And I didn't have a car at the time because a few weeks prior I wrote off my car because I hit a cow on the highway, but that's a whole nother story. So and so I didn't, it would take me probably about an hour or so to get home by bus, and I wasn't too interested in going home and then waiting for a couple hours and then coming right back. So I just hung around the pool, and I knew I had a couple of errands that I'd been meaning to do that I was going to do that day. So I hung around for an hour, a couple hours, and I was about to leave, and I planned to walk around to do my errands when one of my colleagues, a woman named Jocelyn, asked me if I could bring her a Slurpee back after I went out for my errands. And I said, I'd love to, I'd be more than happy to, but I'm walking, so it'll be melted by the time it comes back. And she said, oh, well, just take my car. And I was 17 years old at the time, and I'd never borrowed somebody's car that wasn't one of my parents. I was pretty reluctant, but she was nonchalant. She said, oh, just take my car, it's fine. She ended up being my sister's maid of honor, so she was quite close to their family, had a lot of trust. And, as it turns out, she probably shouldn't have. But so she went and she got her keys, and she asked me, have you know what car is mine, right? And I said, yeah, I've seen you pull in the parking lot a number of times. I recognize it. And so she owned a light-colored Ford Taurus, which, if you can think back to the late 1990s, a Ford Taurus was pretty much every second car on the road. So I had her keys, and I walked out of the building, and sure enough, first car I see, smack dab in the middle, best parking spot in the house, is a white Ford Taurus. So I walk up to the car, and the windows are down, and the doors are unlocked, and so I just get right in. And I see a pair of leopard print sunglasses there, and she's quite a flamboyant person, so I think, oh, this is definitely her. She's confident, so doors are unlocked, windows down, flamboyant with these glasses, so I didn't think anything of it. Put the key in the ignition, try to start it, oh, it wouldn't start. So I push it a little bit harder, and it starts. And I don't think much of it. And I pull out and I start driving off. And me being, a 17-year-old kid who, got a little bit of paranoia built into me, I kept thinking, if the police pull me over, I'll just give them the insurance and I'll say my friend Jocelyn lent me your car, it's okay, and they'll trust me and it won't be a big issue. So the errand that I had to run was to pay a parking ticket that day. So, in order to pay the parking ticket, first I needed to go and get some cash. So I went to the closest bank I knew of, a bank in Montreal not too far from the pool, and I got some cash out of the ATM, went back in the car, and sat down and put the key in the ignition and tried to start it, and it wouldn't start. And I'm trying it, I'm actually kind of forcing it, and the car won't start. And I sit back for a second, and I think, well, what did I do? How did I break this car? And I keep trying, and I tried for what felt like an eternity. It was probably about 5 minutes, but it felt like a really long time, and finally the car started. So I was confident that I had broken this car somehow. I don't know how I did, but somehow I broke this car by starting it one time. So backed out of the parking lot, and I went to the closest police station I knew of. And so where the hydro tower is now, there used to be a strip mall, and within that strip mall was a police station. So I went to the police station, I parked in back, there was a big parking lot in the back, went out front, got into the police station, asked if I could pay the parking ticket, and they said, oh, you can't pay it here, you had to go to the public safety building, the head office for the police. And I said, okay. So I went back out to the car, and this time, because I had parked downtown, I instinctively locked the door. So, of course, as you probably know, these are not the right keys for this particular car, and the keys would not unlock the door. So I stood there for, again, what felt like forever, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, trying to open the car door, and I could not open the car door for the life of me. And just when I was about to give up, 2 commissionaires walked up. A commissionaires organization, they used to do the parking patrol for the city of Winnipeg, and this organization, its mission is a nonprofit organization meant to find jobs, in particular for former police officers and former military members. So these two commissionaires walk up to me and they ask me if I'm having some difficulty, and I said, yeah, I borrowed this car from a friend of mine and I just can't unlock the door for the life of me. And one of them says, well, I've got an old Ford like this at home, and the keys are wonky on all of them. Sometimes you just have to know how to do it. So he takes the key from my hand, puts it in the lock, tries once, tries twice, unlocks it. And then he goes to me, it's all on the wrist. So, okay. So I get in the car, and I spend another 10 minutes trying to start this car, and finally it starts. So I go to the public safety building, And I walk in and I pay the ticket without any issue whatsoever, and I make sure not to lock the door this time. Go back to the car, try to start it, and it took me a few times, maybe 30 seconds or a minute before I was able to start the car that time. And I thought, okay, now I'm getting the hang of it. The key must just be wonky, and Jocelyn must just be really used to it. So I go to do the last thing, and I go to 7-Eleven, the 7-Eleven on the corner of Ellis and Maryland, and I get a couple of Slurpees, and then I go to the pool. And I give the Slurpee and then the keys back to Jocelyn, and I ask her, oh, have you ever had any difficulty starting this car? Ever had difficulty unlocking the door? And she said, oh no, never, not at all. And I started to apologize. I said, well, I think I may have broken your car because I had a lot of trouble with it. And she said, she was a very casual, laid-back person. I'm sure there's nothing to it. So I went into the pool, and it happened that a couple of my friends were in swimming, so they finished swimming, and then we went out to eat. And by the time I got back to the pool, I think Jocelyn probably worked a 12 until 5 shift that day or something. By the time I got back for my 7 o'clock shift, she'd left. So I worked the end of the day shift, and I closed up the pool, and I left with 2 of my colleagues, my colleague and my boss, and we walked out of the building, and there were 3 cars left in the parking lot. There was my boss's, my colleagues, and Jocelyn's car was still there in the exact same parking spot that I had left it. And I forgot to mention, when I brought it back to the pool, the parking spot that I'd taken out of was open, so I pulled right back into the exact same parking spot. So I knew at this point that I had broken this car, and I was 17 years old and kind of paranoid, and I'm wondering how much this is going to cost me, and if this is going to ruin my relationship with this woman, and if this is going to, nobody in the pool is going to like me because I break cars and stuff. And so I didn't sleep very well that night. I was pretty distraught, and I got to the pool the next morning for my 9 a.m. shift. And I walked in, and one of my friends was working the front desk at the time, and she just mentioned sort of casually that the police had been there that morning, and I didn't think too much of it. It's an inner city pool, so the police are there pretty often. And so I go in and I work my shift, and my 9 to 12 shift is teaching swimming lessons. So my last class, as I recall, was a level 3 or level 4, about 7 or 8-year-old kids, and I had probably about a half dozen of them. And I remember I was in the water with them when Jocelyn walked in for her 12 o'clock shift. So she walked down the pool deck, and came towards me to cross the bulkhead. And so she said, hey, good morning, Kevin. And I looked at her, and I was suddenly so distraught again. I said, Jocelyn, I'm so sorry. I must have broke your car. How come you left it here last night? And she looked at me very quizzically, and she said, I didn't leave my car here last night. And right then and there, it dawned on me. And in front of all these kids, I went, holy shit, that wasn't your car. And she looks at me, and her eyes bug out, and she says, holy shit, when you were gone yesterday, somebody reported a car stolen from the parking lot. So as it turned out, in the time I was gone, hour after I'd left or so, somebody went out to find their car, and she saw that the car wasn't there. So she went back in the building, asked to use the phone so she could report her car stolen. But she didn't know her license plate. She forgot her license plate, she didn't have that information, so she couldn't report it stolen. She had to make her own way home. So she either had to walk home or bus home, I'm not sure how she got home. And in that time that it took her to get home, I had come back to the pool. So nobody was looking for me. So the police were there the next morning with her to find her car that was reported stolen in the exact same parking spot she left it, with no sign of forced entry. The windows are up, nothing was missing inside. And so the police either thought she was messing with them, or the police maybe thought that maybe she was off her rocker and she somehow had misplaced her car in this relatively small parking lot that can fit maybe 40 or 50 cars. It's not a very big parking lot. And I wonder if she thought the same thing. She might have thought she was crazy. So, long story short, I ended up stealing a car. I took it to 2 different police stations. I had help breaking into it with 2 potentially ex-police officers. And I brought it back without a problem. And immediately afterwards, my guilty conscience was telling me that I wanted to tell this woman, I wanted to tell the police what had happened, report, say, I took the car, and I'm really sorry. And I was talked out of it by a few friends, and in particular my father, who said, you know what, she's got the car back, you're just going to give a whole lot more paperwork to the police, you're going to give a whole lot more hassle for yourself, you're probably not going to get in trouble, but you never know, and you'll probably give more hassle for this poor woman whose car she thought was stolen, so it's better off if you don't do anything. So all these years later, 20, 21 years later, I've always wondered if she tells stories like this to her friends, because I've told this 200 times, and I wonder if she's told this to anyone else in the last 20 years. So thank you all very much for indulging me in my story.